and identity, and how these transformations reflect the broader global dynamics of place, belonging, and change. Today's conversation will be about the incredible 3 artworks that we have, or multiple artworks that we have across Abu Dhabi, part of the Public Art Biennial, and which are very specific locations that speak about different contexts of which the artists have selected to place their works. I'd like to start with you, Nicholas. Nicholas, your work has been exhibited before, but has different meanings in different places where they're exhibited. So can you speak to us more about your practice and this work in specific, and how the idea of building cultures through indigenous cultures, knowing that you're an indigenous Alaskan artist, which is really something that we are proud to have a number of artists coming from different parts of the world and speaking one same language.
Thank you. I don't know if there's images of the work up here. Yeah, but I would like to speak a little bit about context and this project here. The project that is in the biennial is titled "In Every Language There's Land, cada lengua, una Tierra," which is 2 colonial languages that have histories of removing our indigenous language in North and South America. The work is created from diverted US-Mexico border wall steel. So the scale of this work is by design the scale of the US-Mexico border wall, which also dissects indigenous land, indigenous language. It's a barrier. It's a barrier that's intended to separate. I'm talking about the material of the wall. This work is kind of the opposite of that. It's an intersection that invites viewers to move through it. So for me, this work speaks to migration. It speaks to the movement across land without barrier and intersection of communities. For me, it speaks to the fact that in every language there is understanding of place, and we all come from that. So,
thank you, Nicholas. Lawrence, your work is very site-specific, and the nature of your work is auditory and really brings the idea of sound and privacy in a public place. So can you speak to us more about how this idea came about, being in Abu Dhabi and crossing the park and looking at the different fountains that you have occupied?
Thank you, Alia, and thank you for inviting me to speak. So, the project is in the urban park, one of the many of these beautiful parks that are set back from the Corniche in Abu Dhabi and form this kind of spine through which the biennial is located. Those spaces themselves are incredibly moving in a way because there's just people there every night, and it's packed. People moving through them, and people taking long calls. You see people, they just get on a phone call, they're just talking back home, speaking to. So you could see all the use of this space, and the role of the fountain, especially in the hot weather, was something I was drawn to. And I had remembered the social function of fountains from old Damascene courtyards, which were the place where you can have a private conversation. So the sound of the water, the white noise or the pink noise that's produced by the falling water, would be the site where public intimacy happens. So what do I mean by that? Conversations that you cannot have in the closed private space. People are out together, they're in public space, but they will not be heard. So at those fountains, weddings were organized, business deals were made, many positive and negative things happened at Damascene fountains, and in a way, this work is an ode to that social function of fountains. I wanted to bring people's attention to the kind of noise that they make, and to fountains as acoustic and kind of sonic objects in public space. And so that's why I've intervened by producing all these instruments that are powered, kinetic instruments that are powered by the motion of the water, the existing motion of the water, across 5 fountains, playing different instruments. And each of those instruments is kind of occupying the different spectrum of frequencies that the human voice occupies. So in a way, it's amplifying the social function of those fountains. They are now more than ever places where you can have a private conversation. And that's really in today's world which we live, where there's CCTV, phones, all this stuff around us. It feels to me that maybe we need to kind of turn up the volume of the fountains if we still want to have those spaces of public intimacy.
Great. Thank you, Lawrence. Zainab, your work speaks about modern architecture, modern heritage, and the buildings that are quite specific to Abu Dhabi. Your work is in the main bus terminal. The material that you have used in your work is really recurrent, but this time takes on a different form and life. Could you speak to us more about your artwork, please?
Thank you, Alia. And I'm very happy to share the stage with Nicholas and Lawrence here. I've seen both of your works and very happy to be part of this first Abu Dhabi Public Art Biennale. And I think I would like to speak a little bit about my relationship with public art. I think it's important to understand that when I graduated back in 2009, my first public art intervention was actually at the Dubai Old Souk area, and it had to do with the recreating what I'm familiar with is like a hand barrow that the workers carry their textiles on it. And I think I basically took that hand barrow and what I did was, the reason for the hand barrow was to actually cross between small neighborhoods. And that's why it was done probably like 50 years ago. And in that public art intervention, what I did is that I've allowed the public art space to have that hand barrow being seen as an artwork itself. This time it's not functional, this time it's an artwork. It was interesting because the idea of us projecting something as this is art and this is not is always something that caught my attention. And looking back at that artwork, coming back into this first Biennale, I think what I tried to achieve, or at least looking at the different areas of the art interventions and the places that the public artworks were taking place, especially during my first visit or tour as an artist to the city. Because I think, living in the city is one thing, but looking at it as an artist to place your work becomes a little bit different. So I was looking at those iconic buildings in Abu Dhabi, and again, somehow it is very nostalgic to me. Since I'm from Dubai, I used to come to Abu Dhabi. The iconic bus terminal, which is very, you won't be able to miss it in the city because it has a very vibrant mint green color. So as maybe that sort of nostalgia, and looking at the different works that I've created over the past year, I did like the idea of recreating certain forms and objects and allowing them for a second chance to be seen as artworks. But also looking at that building, what caught my attention is that it's a brutal architectural building. It is it's a specific kind of dramatic geometry that allows the building to be very bold and very hard to miss. So taking that building and the way my brain works, the way I would say, visual aesthetics is that I would always try to deconstruct what I look at and reconstruct it from my own point of view in a way where once it's placed again in the same space, it kind of becomes almost like a camouflage. You see it, but you don't see it. You might think it's art, but maybe it's not. So those kind of questions are the things that I always try to bring into my work. And this time for the Biennale, basically what I did is I recreated the building in a, usually I make things bigger in scale. This time I had to scale it down. And this is also quite interesting, the way I look at things. So I scaled down the building, in a way, sections of the building, and recreated the sculpture as if it is an inviting piece for people to sit on. It is not considered a bench. It is still considered an artwork or an art sculpture. And there is no sign if people are able to like sit on the bench or not. But then we started, getting pictures of people sitting on that bench. And just to also explain a little bit, since we don't have photos, the sculpture is actually made out of a precast concrete, left with its precast concrete original raw color. Because again, if you look at brutal architecture, you will find that most of them are kept with their raw form and material. And then the second element that I try to always bring into my work is an element from nature. I always say I try to bring in those two contrasts, and I try to allow myself, and the public to understand our human interference in this world, but also remember that nature is resilient enough. So we're always trying to somehow be dominant in our forms, in our architectures, in our artworks, but we forget that we're actually living in nature. We are living, whether we want to call it, we are living right now on an island or in the desert or on a mountain. Whether we build things, we construct, we don't deconstruct, we are still living in nature. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Zainab. Well, maybe, Dan, if we can pull out some images.
So that you can actually now visit the art.
If
you can take the tour.
This was the main reason we wanted to have a discussion and get people excited to see the artworks. But maybe if we have some guidebooks, we can or social media, follow our social media. Okay. Speaking about scale and importance of iconic imagery in cities, Nicholas, your work is quite iconic and takes inspiration from different landmarks that we see, maybe in New York, the work was existing as a landmark in itself prior to having it on Corniche. Knowing that you have worked with different mediums and different scales across throughout your career, how do you see the importance of, not necessarily importance, but the impact of creating an artwork in a public space that becomes a landmark that sort of shapes the identity of different cities?
I think there's a few things that could be explained here, especially with this work. One, when we speak about scale, the scale of this work is 30 feet in height, which was, and I think of it as, we talk about even brutalism or the designs of, say, politics and society. That scale is referenced to the one-to-one scale of the border wall that is intended to divide. And on top of this form is some plates that are known as anti-climb plates, which are also intended to prevent someone from climbing or crossing space. And when I reference space in this work, I reference indigenous land, I reference history of how these borders have crossed my communities. So I'm Tlingit and Onanga. I come from my ancestral territory, which is known as Alaska now. And on both sides of the US-Mexico, or the US-Canada border, as my community. So these borders crossed us. I think about the use of scale in these works as intentional. Another previous work that you might be able to find and reference that's similar to this is a piece titled Never Forget, which was a one-to-one text-based land art. That the text said Indian land instead of Hollywood. So if you're familiar with the Hollywood sign, the letters are 44 feet in height. This one replicates that, and it speaks towards this use of iconography in mainstream culture to access Indigenous experience, to access larger audiences' relationship to place, utilizing this iconography. And I think that's an opportunity and a through line when much of our community's been ignored, much of our community's been actively erased, much of our experiences and stories are purposefully amnesias, a purposeful amnesia from the community to not see or have these conversations, and using this iconography for me is a way to access a larger audience.
Thank you. Lawrence, your work takes space in an area that is quite sensitive in its materiality and important in its history for Abu Dhabi and Coronation itself. While working on your process to create this kinetic sculpture, how was your selection to create these specific sounds that take, references from instruments that are, regional instruments that are very delicate in their way that they are put together or composed. Can you speak to us more about like the process of making and putting into consideration the fountains in themselves as objects in their own right?
Yeah, I think in a way they're not meant to be delicate, at least not this delicate. But today we fixed them. If anyone saw it yesterday, we fixed it today. But why I wanted to work with steel also for the structures is because I wanted it to look slightly like a strange, wonky infrastructure. Like the fountains themselves are. I can see that it's also kind of part of the master plan, that those are fountains that get repeated across the city. And so in a way, they're not like landmarks. I mean, the semicircular one perhaps is, but they're really much more like infrastructural items that they're recurring, you keep coming across them. And so I was actually thinking more about that when I was designing the instruments, using stainless steel, of course, because it's waterproof, but also because to reference this feeling of them being sort of this public service, right? This public service that gives privacy in a way. Also the underpass, it's something that is very visually busy. You have all this tiling. You have the Dhabi, which is apparently the first Dhabi of Abu Dhabi, there in the mosaic. And it feels to me that you fill it with sound rather than kind of like image, right? Yes. And of course, the relationship of sound produces space in any context. But there's also kind of like juridical precedents in this region, not here so much, but in the Shami area, Bilad al-Sham, the Levant, where you would find really interesting juridical precedents. Like for the Ottoman era, they said that the common land, which is defined as the space which is defined as public space, the place where anyone can take wood for fire, hunt birds, and I don't know what else is there. This space which does not belong to anyone, it was defined in Ottoman era by a shout. So someone would stand at the edge of a little village or town, they would shout, and as far as that shout reaches, that defined the area that belongs to everyone, common land. And so it's, what I find beautiful about that is not the idea of the shout, the person who shouts, like or the hitting of the drum. It's the place of the listener. Because at the other end of that shout, a listener has to be there. He has to listen to all of the sounds that kind of like, coalesce with that shout. The shout might be, drowned out by a river or a jackal or music or whatever it is, but they have to listen to the very point where that shout disappears. And I find it really a beautiful sort of practice between kind of listening as a formation of public space as well as kind of sound making. And so things like that are also kind of like, in a way, recalled here when you hear just the very edge. You can just hear the drums. It's kind of drowned out by the other instruments. So the spacing between the fountains also works really well in terms of kind of like creating this parkour and this kind of like the limits of audibility and the way one leaks into the other. Yeah.
That's true that when you're walking, you could measure the distances because of the sound of the fountains when you walk across the underpass.
And from there, you might become aware of all the other sounds that fill public space, right? When you're just trying to hear the drums, you might hear kids laughing or this happening. So kind of like it generally kind of awakens your sonic imagination in the public space.
It's a beautiful experience, I may say. Zainab, for this specific work, we were speaking about, intervening with the artwork, laying down and using the two sculptures as, a reclining chair or something like that. You chose to create two of these sculptures because you were talking about the interest in symmetry in these buildings. Abu Dhabi, we conserve a lot of like modern heritage buildings, and in this biennial in particular, we shed light on different buildings like the National Theatre or the bus terminal. How much of the materiality of the building dictated the work that you have created, and what are the different ways you were looking at to create the process of like the symmetry in the work and the scale?
I think, I have this way of looking at things sometimes which keeps happening in different spaces. I think my interest in site-specific art installations or even public art has always been a way of maybe trying to invite the public to understand art rather than saying, there's an exhibition and I'd like the art, people to look at the art. So I think since the beginning, I've always been interested in spaces that are not art related. When I say the beginning, I mean like just like as an artist maybe. And I think giving those different locations in Abu Dhabi and the city became like somehow an invitation for the public realm, for the crowd, for the people who use the streets and the buildings, and also the different pedestrian to be aware of like the new things that are happening in the locations or in the city. So I think as much as I would like to look at my work as an art, as an art sculpture, I really wanted it to blend with the just the pedestrian and like, there's the part of the concrete which blends with the building, but then there's the part of the grass where if you look at it from one angle, it's gonna blend with the grass on the ground. And I think, it's not the first time, but I was actually asked a few times, where's your art located? In the Biennale, and I was telling people it's actually across the bus station, and they go like, oh, there's that big tree, which is the sculptural piece. I was like, yes, next to it. They're like, we need to go back and visit. And I think to me, this is a successful sort of thing, because again, I did not want the work to completely stand out, although the sculptural pieces are 10 meters in width, and we have two of them, which are not necessarily very close to each other. But I think there's always this play factor that I try to implement in the things that I do in my art. And to me, this time I've achieved it by, bringing those two materials together, which are, again, it's a very common material in the street. You see concrete blocks laying everywhere. You see construction happening all the time. And a lot of parts about the idea of the visual construction that I've witnessed through my, I think, upbringing in the city has influenced my work very heavily. As we've worked together a couple of times before. I think I tried to embrace the idea of construction in my work without it being something that we shed our eyes from. As we, for example, you see a construction site being completely covered. And maybe not many people ask, what's this being built? But as you see the facade coming on the building, on the concrete, you start giving it a brand, an identity, a name, then the crowd or the public starts being more interested in the work of saying, oh, what is this building? Although the building might have been being built for the past 10 years. It is just when it is complete that we try to ask about it. And I think there's a part of my work that is always left incomplete. It's left raw, and it's always in the process of becoming something, but it stops at some point. Thank you.
Thank you. Nicholas, the construction of your work was quite a challenge. I'm sure it is, with artworks in this scale, especially in a place like Corniche. But after, you see it constructed and all, in its full glory, we noticed the different ways that you have created the artworks in 4 layers, which is beautifully seen from all angles to look at the work. You blend in, letters or a word with something that's more abstract. Can you tell us about the process of making the design and structure itself?
Sure. I think working with the concept of land, for me, I always immediately look beyond the surface, beyond what we might assume is in the conversation. And I look to the community, I think. I look at how it's engaged. Specifically working with this material, which is a barrier, the intentional creation of the specific Corten steel that the sculpture is made from, is that you can only buy it from one company in the US, where it was fabricated by design for this barrier and this wall. With that in mind, the sculpture for me became more of a vessel and a form of invitation to explore it, opposed to a barrier to restrict movement through. And I feel like that's a really important aspect of it. If you get a chance to navigate it, you can literally walk through it. So.
How are we on time? I have more questions because as much as we see each other, it's always nice to speak more about the works. So I will, since we have 10 more minutes, I will open for questions if you have any questions from the public.
Hi. My question is to you, Nicholas. Since I do pass Corniche very often, I'm very curious why you chose the space, and if your intention of the artwork was to inform people about the history of the artwork, or is it to interpret it in the way that you want? Land can mean a lot, can be interpreted in different ways to different people.
I feel like this space here is distinctly different for the work as an intersection, literally, with the intersection in front of it, but also conversations of reclamation of land in my community is very different than land reclamation here as we understand. And I feel like this allows for engagement in various forms. There's not one way to see this work. There's a way to understand it, though, and there's a way to understand that all of us have relationship to place, and we get to look at how we handle that amongst each other and consider that. And I think that's a really important aspect to humanity.
Any more questions? Okay. When I will ask, since we have more time, I would like to know your experience with the stages of looking at the spaces. For example, Lawrence, I know that you're interested in not only the performative piece of your work, but also in documenting it in reference to, maybe you can speak to us about the documentation and the film you're planning to work on.
Yeah, so there's an idea. I mean, it's all gonna change now because the work is there in front of me. But the idea was also to use the fountains as a stage set for a film. And as a reference to Francis Ford Coppola's The Conversation, which is its 50-year anniversary. If you don't know that film, it's about the whole opening scene is shot from above, and it's one guy trying to capture record a conversation as two people move through public space. And I wanted to use the fountains as this kind of evasive strategy where the conversation you hear in the film would kind of come in and out of audibility as they move through that site, so that it would anyway have a kind of sort of legacy beyond the work being shown for the biennial. So that's one idea. Let's see how it comes together.
Yes. It's true that it's important to document in all different forms, and some of the works that are ephemeral. We have the work of Bic van der Pol, for example. We have the time lapse of the work being written on the shores. But moments like that, when you walk in the underpass and truly feel like you're listening to things that come in and fade out, hopefully you'll be able to work on that.
Can I say something?
Of course.
My experience with your work that was interesting to note was in a digital era of technology, where everything we say, everything we do is potentially, recorded or monitored. And I feel like for me there was this connection to that conversation.
Yeah, exactly. And they're these kind of, they look unlikely in that context because they're very mechanical. And in a way, very kind of simple or basic in their function. Literally hammers hitting things, beaters hitting things, falling, using just the motion of the water. So there's this kind of direct tension between that sort of digital and the sort of mechanical that you see, the physical.
Especially in a time where you feel like everything is like you said, digital and technologic. It feels like almost robotic, but it's very material based in the most beautiful way. Extremely poetic. The first time one experiences the work, it's almost, you feel like there are actual people, there's a soul to the music that is created with the sound of the fountains that is poetic in its own sense, but with the drums that connotate different kinds of celebrations within our own cultures, you feel like almost there is a celebration that is, that you are yet to experience.
That's actually one thing, just to finish there, I don't mean to take up time, but what's interesting about the drums is that because they're asynchronous, they're not playing in a rhythm, you feel it's like a zafir, like a, what do you call zafir?
Yes, it's like the music that follows for weddings.
For the parade of a wedding, when you bring out the groom.
Yeah.
but one that is very distant, like you'd imagine it reflecting off all these surfaces. So it's like you feel a zephyr is always coming, no? Like a
It's
wedding
true.
is always about to come, and at some point the rhythm will lock down,
Yes.
and then you will hear, and then you'll see the groom, but you never hear it. It's just
Yeah.
always kind of like the zephyr that's about to be there. Yeah.
It's true, and you know, being really close to the sea, it reminds me of, you know, all the maritime music during all the travels for pearl trading. The source of entertainment for divers was really music and playing with drums to, you know, you have months and hours of waiting and traveling in the sea. So it really felt for me as also an Emirati who's connected to the sea, this kind of connection, cultural connection, zephyr or you know, maritime music or just the presence of people, although, you know, there are no people performing. Yes, Adrian.
A little bit to this idea of the positionality of Emmy, because for sure within the listing of people, some people are quite rooted in the region as they grew up in Abu Dhabi, and this idea of putting a public art space from the place you're from versus coming and interacting with the space for the first time. How do you manage that relation? And also, how much did you consider also the audience that most commonly uses those spaces in the bus stop? I mean, we see these movements of people, and even in these green strips of the city, who constantly is using those places? How you considered the audience? So there's like kind of two questions.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Adrian. I think, you know, personally, like when I was doing the first site visits, we had those tours organized with the curators and the artists, and there were a few of them in different locations, including Abu Dhabi, Al Ain, Abu Dhabi Corniche, Abu Dhabi Parks, and then the bus terminal. And just because, you know, we did this walk, and to me, it was quite interesting because like it made me realize that, oh, I don't walk in the park as much as I would like to, or I'm not going to the Corniche as much. So to be honest, I think it kind of felt like as if it's the first time for me to go and visit those places. Although, as I mentioned, I am from Dubai. I used to visit Abu Dhabi as a child. Obviously, I visit Abu Dhabi as an adult as well. But I think the interactions inside the streets and the Corniche and the city, it doesn't happen as often. It's just the way our lifestyles are in this time. It's just like you're on the car, crossing the Corniche. Sometimes because you're used to like maybe the landscaping of the area and the streets, you don't really even look a lot. You know, you're looking at the street, you're trying to avoid looking at your phone. So I think it's very, very interesting that you are asked to visit the sites and look at it from you, the artist, and maybe not the human. It was very different for me because I was paying attention at the tiles, I was paying attention at the underpassing, you know, and we had those conversations. I was like, oh, how long has this been here? And, oh, is this fountain always been there? And like, I'm trying to really remind myself or my memory, like it was so, some of those places were vivid and other places were very blurry. Like I could almost feel like I never visited this place before. So I think we'd love to, you know, because of the weather, but again, I think we have some really good months of the weather. It's, I think, the lifestyle. You know, we want to walk in a gym. We want to walk on a treadmill, maybe to avoid, you know, the heat or sometimes even the traffic. But that being said, I think, just to answer the question, when I wanted to create the public artwork, I really was not considering even myself. I was considering the people who use that space more often. I was thinking about their awareness of if someone goes to the bus terminal every day, and then they go to the next day, and then there's the artwork there. Would they stand for a minute, or would they not? Like, would they cross? And to me, honestly, while we were doing the installations, I could see some people who are coming outside the bus terminal, even like at late hours, and trying to look in between the fence and see what's going on. And again, to me, it's a very interesting site or something to look at, because everyone would think it's a construction site. And then, you know, the fences are out and suddenly it's an artwork, but somehow it looks like the building. There's a confusion behind that, but I enjoy doing that as well. It's part of the, I think, just implementing art in the city in different perspectives and different visions. But to be honest with you, I feel that there's a lot more potential of making more art in the city. I feel that I would love to be even part of the second edition,
just the beginning,
because I now have so many other ideas.
of course. I mean, you know, the work is made for the public. This first edition is really dedicated to the public. These, for example, the parks on Corniche are extensions of people's homes, you know. There are a lot of residential buildings that are across of these parks, and people, you know, wake up in the morning, go to work, bring their kids back from school, and then go outside and play in these parks, even exercise in the parks. You know, there are different equipments for exercise, cook, gather, eat. So even if you tend to drive, or you know, you're a person who comes from another emirate or a visitor or so forth, once you're down there, you know, in the parks or walking across downtown near Cultural Foundation, it's very easy to walk around. The city of Abu Dhabi is built on a grid system, so it's easier to commute than other bigger cities. So us, you know, in the curatorial team and in the Department of Culture and Tourism, we really we chose the locations to make sure that we, in our first edition of the Biennale, choose locations that, you know, are highly populated, that will make a difference in people's lives and daily lives, most importantly. Yeah. Do you have any more questions? Yes. The microphone.
The very nice thing about the Biennale actually is the fact that you discover the city. I've been here several times, and as you were saying, I didn't know Abu Dhabi. You come, you go to Louvre, you come to the fair, you go to the hotel, to a restaurant, and you leave. But it was like a rally this morning, like driving or walking from an artwork to the other, and this was the chance to interact for the first time with Abu Dhabi itself, and not with the places we're working at when we come to the city. So there you have succeeded beautifully, putting works around the park and this amazing brutalist architectural bus terminal, and the place where Laurence has put his work. I mean, those fountains, I mean, you see the city living, because when you see the buildings behind it, people don't have balconies or gardens in their homes, so they come to those public places to communicate, as they do in Beirut on the Corniche. They do it here in Abu Dhabi on the Corniche and in the parks as well. So therefore, putting those sculptures around the park and make people walk from one work to the other and discover the city itself. That is very good done, very well done, bravo.
Thank you so much. We're really happy that this experience is felt, and we have created different routes, and I welcome you to discover these routes through our website, where we made them. No, the routes, of course, physically. Yes, of course. I mean, to understand what different routes we have, and to know where to park your car, where to go, and then to experience it by foot, with your heart, and in all your senses, actually. Thank you so much for coming. I welcome you to discover the Biennale and to visit Al-Ain. We have artworks that are located in important historical sites, in Al-Hili Archaeological Park, and near Al-Jahali Fort, and different important locations in Al-Ain and Abu Dhabi. Thank you very much for coming.